I arrived at Dovetail on a Tuesday in March. The descent capsule dropped through 13,000 feet of black water, and I spent most of it reviewing my notes. I wasn't there to fix anything. I was there to watch people break. My title was Lead Behavioral Auditor, which meant I got paid to sit in rooms with psych study subjects and document their deterioration. Dovetail was running a 90-day isolation experiment aboard the USV Tartarus, a decommissioned vessel retrofitted for deep-water research. 3 crew members, 1 habitat module, and a director who wanted to prove that humans could handle prolonged confinement at crushing depth. My job was to confirm what I already knew. They couldn't. The capsule locked into the docking port with a metallic thud, and I stepped through the airlock into the main corridor. The air smelled like recycled breath and industrial cleaner. The walls were composite, slightly curved, with conduit lines running along the ceiling. Everything was labeled with safety instructions in 3 languages, the kind of overkill you see in facilities designed by committees. Silas Vane was waiting for me on the observation deck. He was older, maybe mid-50s, wearing a collared shirt and slacks that looked absurd in a deep-sea habitat. His cologne was faint but noticeable, something expensive that didn't belong here. He had a cup of tea in one hand and a tablet in the other. "Johann," he said. "Welcome to Dovetail." "Dr. Vane." "Please, just Vane. We're all colleagues here." He gestured to the observation window, a 9-inch slab of reinforced glass looking out into the black. "Impressive, isn't it? 13,000 feet. The pressure out there could crush a car into a soda can." "I've read the specs." "Of course you have." He smiled, but there was something calculated about it. "I understand you've audited similar studies before. Arctic stations, orbital modules. How does Dovetail compare?" "I just got here." "Fair enough." He sipped his tea. "Day 73, and we've had minimal incidents. A few stress markers naturally, but nothing outside expected parameters." I didn't respond. People always said that right before things fell apart. "You'll be conducting your evaluations in the common area," Vane continued. "I've scheduled mandatory check-in, standard protocol." "Understood." He turned to leave, then paused. "You have a certain way of looking at people, Johann, like specimens in a jar." He smiled. "Be careful, even lab rats bite when cornered." I didn't respond. I watched him walk away, and I felt something tighten in my chest. Not fear, irritation. Vane was the kind of director who thought he understood psychology because he'd read a few journals. Worse, he was probably corporate, sent to audit me as much as the crew, to make sure I wasn't the liability. I made a mental note. Vane was an obstacle, not an ally. He disappeared down the corridor, and I stood at the observation window for a moment, staring into the dark. The 9-inch glass separated me from 13,000 feet of crushing water. I felt superior because I trusted the engineering. The pressure was constant here, a weight you couldn't see but always felt. It pressed against the hull, the glass, the walls. It pressed against you. That's what broke people in the end, not the isolation, the weight. I went to my quarters and unpacked. The room was small, just a bunk, a desk, and a locker. I set up my recording equipment and reviewed Cornett's file. 26 years old, marine engineering background, history of mild anxiety. Vane had flagged him as a variable, which meant he expected Cornett to crack first. I walked to the common area at the scheduled time. Cornett was already there, sitting at a metal table with his hands folded in front of him. He was thin, pale, with dark circles under his eyes. His jumpsuit had sweat stains under the arms. He looked like he hadn't slept well in weeks. "Mr. Cornett," I said, sitting down across from him. "I'm Johann. I'll be conducting your behavioral evaluation." "Yeah," Vane told me. His voice was quiet, strained. "This is a standard check-in. I'm going to ask you a few questions about your experience here. How you're sleeping, how you're managing stress, that sort of thing. Everything you say is confidential." He nodded, but he didn't look at me. He was staring at the table. "How are you sleeping?" I asked. "Fine." "Fine meaning you're getting a full 8 hours, or fine meaning you're managing?" He hesitated. "I don't know, maybe 5 or 6 hours." "And the quality?" "It's hard to sleep here. There's a sound." I made a note. Audio hallucinations were common in isolation studies. The brain filled silence with noise. "What kind of sound?" He glanced toward the air duct in the corner of the room. "The engine. It's this low hum, like a fan running in the next room. You hear it everywhere." "That's normal," I said. "Ventilation systems, water pumps, it's ambient noise." "No." He leaned forward, dropping his voice. "It's not real." I stopped writing. "What do you mean?" "It's a recording, a loop. I timed it." He was whispering now, his hands gripping the edge of the table. 4 minutes and 12 seconds, every time. Exact. The pitch, the rhythm, everything. It repeats. I looked at him for a long moment. He believed what he was saying. That was clear. The isolation had already started eroding his perception. "Have you mentioned this to Vane?" I asked. "Once. He said it was the nitrogen. Said I was hearing things." Cornett shook his head. "But I'm not. I counted it. 43 times yesterday. Same loop." "Why would anyone play a recording of engine noise?" He didn't answer. He just stared at me, waiting for me to believe him. I finished the evaluation and let him go. He left quickly, like he didn't want to be in the room any longer than necessary. I opened my tablet and updated his file. Heightened anxiety, possible auditory fixation, paranoid ideation, standard deterioration markers. I wrote a prescription for lorazepam, 2 milligrams, twice daily. Then I flagged his status: high risk, unfit for duty. Vane was right. Cornett would be the first to break. I felt satisfied. This was what I did. I identified the weak points before they became disasters. Young, anxious, hyper-focused on environmental stimuli. He'd probably request early extraction within the week. I'd seen it a dozen times before. But that night, I couldn't sleep. I lay in my bunk and I heard it. The hum, low and steady, coming from the air duct above my head. It sounded like a fan or maybe a distant turbine. Ambient noise, mechanical white noise, nothing unusual. I checked my watch, 3 a.m. I listened. 4 minutes passed. The hum stopped for half a second, then started again. Same pitch, same rhythm. I kept listening. 4 minutes, 12 seconds. The hum cycled, reset, repeated. I counted it 7 times before I got out of bed. I walked to the air duct and pressed my ear against the vent. The sound was clearer there, but it didn't change. It looped. Exactly, every 4 minutes and 12 seconds. Cornett was right. No, not right. I caught myself. There had to be an explanation. I listened again, focusing. There, a tiny digital skip at the end of each cycle, barely noticeable. An artifact, a bitrate issue. This wasn't evidence of deception. It was just a poorly calibrated audio masking loop, probably implemented to cover the actual mechanical noise that would drive people insane at this depth. Engineering needed to fix it. That was all. I went back to bed and made a mental note to mention it in my report. Standard maintenance issue. Nothing more. But I didn't sleep. I stared at the ceiling and listened to the sound play over and over, and part of me kept counting. 4 minutes, 12 seconds. 4 minutes, 12 seconds. Exact. I woke up on day 3 to silence. It took me a moment to realize what was wrong. The hum was gone. The 4-minute, 12-second loop that had been playing non-stop since I arrived had stopped sometime during the night. The air ducts were quiet. The only sound was the faint creak of the hull adjusting to pressure and the low thrum of the water pumps in the next module. 7:30 in the morning. I'd slept longer than I meant to. I got dressed and went to the common area for breakfast, David Abney was already there, sitting at the table with a cup of coffee and a tablet. He was the site lead, mid-40s, ex-Navy, with the kind of calm competence you see in people who've worked underwater for decades. I'd met him briefly on my first day, but we hadn't spoken much. He looked up when I walked in. "Morning," he said. "Morning." I poured myself coffee and sat down. "Have you seen Cornett?" Abney looked at me. "Who?" "Leo Cornett, the technician." "We don't have a Cornett." Abney set down his tablet. "Johan, I've been on this vessel for 75 days. There's me, Vane, and Miller, 3 people." I felt something cold settle in my chest. "Where's Miller?" "Module C, running diagnostics." Abney leaned forward. "Are you feeling all right?" I stood up. "I need to check something." I left the common area and went straight to my quarters. My hands were shaking as I pulled up the crew roster on my tablet. 3 names: Silas Vane, David Abney, Miller. No Leo Cornett. I scrolled through the personnel files, searching for any mention of him. Nothing. I opened my own evaluation logs. The file was still there, labeled Cornett Leo, Day 1 Assessment. I clicked it. 0 bytes. Corrupted. I tried the audio recording I'd made during the interview. Same thing. 0 bytes. Corrupted. I sat on my bunk and stared at the tablet. This wasn't possible. I'd spoken to Cornett. I'd written a prescription for him. I'd flagged him as unfit for duty. He'd told me about the loop and I'd heard it myself. He was real. I went back to the common area. Abney was still there, finishing his coffee. "Where's Vane?" I asked. "Observation deck, probably. He's usually up there in the mornings." I found Vane exactly where Abney said he'd be, standing at the 9-inch window with a fresh cup of tea. He turned when he heard me approach. "Johan," he said, "you're up late today. I need to talk to you about Leo Cornett." Vane's expression didn't change. "I'm sorry. Who?" "Leo Cornett, the technician, 26 years old, marine engineering background, history of anxiety. You flagged him as a variable in the study. I interviewed him on day 1. "Johan, I think you should sit down." "I don't need to sit down. I need you to tell me where Cornett is." "There is no Cornett." Vane's voice was calm, almost soothing. "Our crew consists of 3 people, David Abney, tech specialist Miller, and myself. You've been here for 3 days. You've conducted 1 evaluation with Miller yesterday afternoon." "That's not true." "Johan, listen to me. We're at 13,000 feet. The pressure, the isolation, the recycled air, nitrogen narcosis can cause confusion, false memories. You're creating patterns where there aren't any, people where there aren't any." He paused. "You're lonely, Johan. The brain does remarkable things to fight isolation." I felt my jaw tighten. I wrote a prescription for him. Lorazepam, 2 milligrams, twice daily. "Check your files," Vane said gently. I did. "They're corrupted." "Then perhaps the corruption is the answer. A technical glitch, data loss. It happens." "I think you should take the rest of the day to rest. We can revisit this tomorrow when you're feeling better." I turned and walked away before I said something I'd regret. I spent the next 2 hours going through every file, every log, every piece of documentation I had. There was no mention of Leo Cornett anywhere. The crew manifest, the personnel records, the duty rosters. All of them listed 3 people: Vane, Abney, Miller. But I knew what I'd seen. I knew what I'd heard. At 11 in the morning, I went to the crew quarters in Module B. There were 4 bunks, arranged 2 on each side of a narrow corridor. Vane's quarters were marked with his name. Abney's, the same. The 3rd had a label that said J. Miller. The 4th bunk had no label. I opened the door. The room was empty. Not just empty, stripped. The mattress was bare, the locker was open and cleared out, and there were no personal items anywhere. It looked like no one had ever lived there. It smelled of bleach. I stepped inside and closed the door behind me. I searched the locker and mattress. Nothing. I was about to leave when I saw it. A small silver Zippo lighter wedged into the gap between the mattress and the wall frame. I picked it up. It was warm. Not body temperature warm. Warmer than that. Electronic heat. The metal felt like it had been sitting next to running equipment, behind the wall. I turned it over. Engraved on the side were two initials, LC, Leo Cornett. I held the lighter in my hand and felt my pulse hammering in my ears. This was real. He was real. Part of me wanted to believe Vane. Nitrogen narcosis was real. False memories happened at depth, but the lighter was real. I wasn't imagining it. I slipped the lighter into my pocket and left the empty bunk. I didn't go back to my quarters. I went to the observation deck and stood at the window, staring out into the black. 13,000 feet of water pressed against the glass. I thought about Vane's words: nitrogen narcosis, isolation-induced pareidolia, false memories. I wasn't crazy. The data was lying. I stopped drinking the water on day 4. It wasn't a conscious decision at first. I just noticed that every time I filled my cup from the dispenser in the common area, I felt slower afterward, heavier. My thoughts would blur at the edges and I'd lose track of time. I'd sit down to review files and look up an hour later with no memory of what I'd been doing. The water was the only thing that made sense. Centralized distribution system. Easy to dose. Easy to control. I started drinking from the emergency reserves in my quarters instead. Sealed bottles, stored in a locker under my bunk. They tasted like plastic, but at least I knew what was in them. By day 5, my lips were cracked and my head was pounding. I hadn't slept more than 2 hours at a stretch. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Cornett's face. I kept the lighter in my pocket. I checked it every hour to make sure it was still there. Still real. That morning, I was sitting in the common area, staring at my tablet and trying to make sense of the corrupted files, when I heard it. A high-pitched buzzing sound, erratic and sharp. I looked up. A fly. It was circling the overhead lights, moving in quick, jagged patterns. Black body, translucent wings. A common housefly. At 13,000 feet below the surface. I stood up slowly, watching it. The fly landed on the edge of the table, rubbing its front legs together. I moved toward it, careful not to make any sudden movements. It didn't fly away. I cupped my hands over it and felt the faint vibration of its wings against my palms. I had it. I went back to my quarters and found a small plastic specimen container in my kit. I transferred the fly inside and sealed the lid. It buzzed against the walls, frantic and alive. This was real. Flies didn't survive pressure capsule descents. They didn't live in hermetically sealed deep-sea habitats. Someone had brought it here. Someone had put it here. I needed proof that couldn't be erased. I went to my quarters and examined the fly under the overhead light. Common housefly. Wings intact, body undamaged. It hadn't been crushed or frozen. Someone had brought it here alive. I logged the evidence in my tablet. Specimen collected, time stamped, photographed. I made detailed notes about the impossibility of its presence at this depth. The water supply had to be compromised. My foggy thinking, the dry mouth, the time I'd lost, classic signs of sedative dosing. They were drugging us through the water. I saved 3 copies to different folders. If they corrupted one file, I'd have backups. I heard footsteps behind me, boots on metal grating. I turned and saw 2 men in dark blue polos with a logo I didn't recognize. Corporate security. They weren't holding weapons, but they were moving toward me with purpose. "Johan," one of them said, "we need you to come with us." I didn't think. I ran. I wasn't fast. I wasn't tactical. I was a rat scrambling for a hole. I ducked into the first open access hatch I saw and climbed into the crawl space between modules. The space was narrow, lined with conduit pipes and ventilation ducts. I crawled through the dark, my hands scraping against metal and composite panels until I found a junction point where the walls met. I stopped and pressed my back against the wall, trying to control my breathing. My hands were shaking, my head was pounding. I could hear the guards moving in the corridor below, calling my name. I stayed still. After a few minutes, the voices faded. I sat there in the dark, listening to the sound of my own heartbeat. The hum was louder here. The engine thrum, the ambient noise that had been playing since day one. It was coming from somewhere close. I pressed my ear against the bulkhead and felt the vibration through the metal. I followed the sound deeper into the crawl space, crawling on my hands and knees until I reached a small maintenance panel bolted to the frame. The hum was coming from behind it, loud, constant. I used the edge of my lighter to pry the panel loose. The screws came away easily, like they'd been opened before. Behind the panel was a speaker, not machinery, not a turbine or a pump or an engine component. A high-fidelity audio speaker bolted to the frame, vibrating with the fake loop. The wires ran back into the wall, disappearing into the conduit. I stared at it for a long time. The engine noise wasn't real. It had never been real. It was a recording, played on repeat, piped through speakers hidden in the walls. The same interval. Exact. I crawled past the speaker, moving deeper into the maintenance shaft. My belt buckle scraped against the wall beside me, and I heard a sound that was wrong. Not the ring of metal on metal. Duller, softer. I stopped and touched the wall. The texture was off, not smooth composite. Rougher. I pulled out my lighter and flicked it open. The wall wasn't composite, wasn't titanium. It was wood. I scraped at it with my belt buckle, and a thin curl of white paint came away, revealing raw pine underneath. I leaned closer and smelled it. Fresh, dry, pine. You don't build deep-sea habitats out of wood. You don't use pine at 13,000 feet of pressure. Wood compresses, wood rots, wood fails. Unless you're not at 13,000 feet. Unless you're not underwater at all. I sat in the crawl space, holding the lighter, staring at the wood, and I understood. The composite walls were a facade. The 9-inch observation window was a screen. The pressure, the depth, the isolation. All of it was a lie. I wasn't in a research vessel at the bottom of the ocean. I spent the rest of the night in the crawl space, staring at the wood, running my fingers over the pine grain. By the time morning came, I'd made a decision. If this was a simulation, then someone was watching, someone was controlling it, and if they were controlling it, there had to be a control room. I crawled out of the maintenance shaft and made my way to Module A. The guards weren't looking for me anymore. Either they'd given up or they were waiting to see what I'd do next. I moved through the corridors carefully, listening for footsteps, watching for cameras. The communications room was at the far end of Module A, behind a door marked Authorized Personnel Only. I tried the access panel. It was unlocked. The room was small, lined with equipment racks and monitors. Most of the screens showed static or system diagnostics. One monitor displayed a schematic of the facility, color-coded by module. There was a desk in the corner with a tablet and a clipboard. I picked up the clipboard. It was a script, not a technical manual, not a maintenance log, a script. Typed pages organized by scene number with dialogue and stage directions. I flipped through it, scanning the headings. Scene 34, Subject 89 discovers audio loop. Scene 38, Subject 89 analyzes physical evidence, fly specimen. Scene 42, Subject 89 will likely attempt to access communications room. Scene 42. This scene, right now. My hands started shaking. I kept reading. If Subject 89 locates this document, observe his response. Document level of paranoia, problem-solving capability, and willingness to deviate from predicted behavior. I stared at the page. They knew I would find this. They wanted me to find this. My rebellion, my investigation, my discovery of the plywood, it was all part of the test. They'd written it down. They'd predicted it. I flipped to the next page. Scene 43. Subject 89 attempts negotiation or demands extraction. No, not this time. I tore the script in half and dropped it on the floor. If they wanted predictable behavior, I'd give them the opposite. I'd go off script. I left the communications room and headed toward the stern of the vessel, toward the torpedo room. If this was a simulation, if the depth and pressure were fake, then the observation window was fake. The walls were fake. Everything was fake. But the torpedo room had a manual pressure release valve designed for emergency evacuation of seawater in the event of a flood. If I opened it, one of two things would happen. If we were really at 13,000 feet, the pressure would crush me instantly. If we weren't, nothing would happen. And I'd know. The torpedo room was at the end of Module C, through a narrow access corridor. The blast door was heavy, reinforced steel with a manual lock. I pulled it shut behind me and spun the wheel, sealing it from the inside. The room was cold and smelled like oil. The torpedo tubes were mounted horizontally along the far wall, sealed with heavy bolts. There was a control panel to my right, inactive, and a red-painted manual release lever mounted on the bulkhead. Warning labels covered the wall around it in 3 languages. Do not operate under pressure. Emergency use only. I climbed onto one of the torpedo tubes and grabbed a heavy wrench from the maintenance kit bolted to the wall. My heart slammed against my ribs. My hands were slick with sweat. I found the intercom panel and pressed the button. I know about the wood. My voice came out hoarse, cracked. I know about the speakers. I know this isn't real. Static. Then Vane's voice, calm and measured. Johan, step away from the release valve. I'm opening the window, I said. I'm flooding the room. If you don't end this, I'm pulling the lever. There was a pause. When Vane spoke again, he sounded disappointed, bored even. Don't break the equipment, Johan. It's expensive. Then unlock the door and let me out. End the simulation. You're not in a simulation. Yes, I am. The walls are wood. The engine noise is a recording. You erased Cornet. Johan, you're dehydrated. You're suffering from acute paranoia. You need medical attention. I found the script, I said. Scene 42. You predicted I'd be here. Another pause. We've run this study 17 times. We know the patterns. You're not special. You're predictable. I felt something twist in my chest, not fear, anger. If you're wrong, Vane continued, if we really are at 13,000 feet and you pull that lever, you'll die. The pressure will collapse your lungs. The room will flood in less than 2 seconds. You'll be dead. Then unlock the door. No. You need to make a choice, Johan. Trust your training, or trust your paranoia. Either way, we learned something. I stood on the torpedo tube, holding the wrench, staring at the red lever. Blood roared in my ears. My throat was dry. I thought about the script, Scene 43. They'd predicted I would try to negotiate, but they hadn't predicted this. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the specimen container. The fly was still inside, motionless now, dead or dormant. I held it up to the intercom camera. This is a housefly, I said. Musca domestica. It doesn't survive at depth. It doesn't survive in sealed habitats. Someone brought it here. Someone put it here to test me. Vane didn't respond. You erased Cornet. You corrupted my files, but you couldn't erase this. I shook the jar. This is real. The data might be lying, but this isn't. I set the jar down on the control panel and walked to the manual release lever. I wrapped my hand around the grip. The metal was cold. If I'm wrong, I said, I die. If I'm right, the simulation ends. Either way, I get an answer. Johan, don't do this. I looked at the observation camera mounted in the corner of the room. I looked directly into the lens. End the simulation. I pulled the lever. The sound was immediate, a hiss of escaping air followed by a mechanical clunk as the pressure seals disengaged. I braced myself against the wall, waiting for the rush of water, the crushing weight, the cold black flood that would kill me in 2 seconds. Nothing happened. The hiss continued. The seals opened, but no water came. I stood there, gripping the wrench, staring at the open valve. My lungs were burning. My hands were shaking so hard I could barely hold on. No water, no pressure, no ocean. I started laughing. It came out harsh and ragged, almost a sob. I dropped the wrench and walked to the open valve, looking through the gap where the seals had retracted. Beyond the opening, I didn't see water. I saw lights, studio lights, scaffolding, cables running along the floor. And beyond that, through the gap, I saw a room, a warehouse, concrete floors, high ceilings. We weren't underwater. We'd never been underwater. I leaned against the wall and slid down to the floor, still laughing, still shaking. I looked up at the camera. End the simulation, I said again. Quieter this time. The lights flickered, the intercom crackled, and then Vane's voice, no longer calm, no longer measured. Shut it down. The opening was wider than I expected. I pulled myself through the gap, squeezing past the retracted pressure seal, and felt my hands grip something solid, metal scaffolding. I hauled myself forward, my legs still inside the tube, and looked down. I was 5 feet above concrete. I let go. The impact knocked the wind out of me. I lay on my back, staring up at industrial lights mounted on steel trusses 40 feet above. The air smelled like dust and machine oil, not salt water, not recycled atmosphere, dust and concrete and paint. I rolled onto my side and looked back at what I'd been living in for 6 days. The modules I'd thought were reinforced titanium were painted particle board, braced with metal brackets and wood framing. The whole structure sat on hydraulic jacks, surrounded by scaffolding. The observation window wasn't 9-inch reinforced glass. It was a flat screen monitor bolted to a plywood frame. The cables I'd seen running through the crawl spaces weren't ship systems. They were extension cords, duct-taped to the floor, snaking toward control stations and server racks along the warehouse walls. There was a folding table near the base of the scaffolding. Someone had left a half-empty coffee cup on it. A paperback novel, dog-eared and face down. A jacket draped over the back of a plastic chair. It looked like a high school theater set. I heard boots on concrete, heavy, fast. I tried to stand, but my legs wouldn't cooperate. I'd been crouching in maintenance shafts for too long. I stumbled forward and got 3 steps before they grabbed me. 4 men in black tactical gear, private contractors, judging by the mismatched patches. They didn't speak. One of them pulled my arms behind my back and zip-tied my wrists while the others formed a perimeter. Professional. Efficient. They'd done this before. They dragged me toward the far end of the warehouse, past the mock-up, past rows of equipment racks and monitoring stations. I twisted my head, looking back at the Tartarus. A technician in gray coveralls was already inside the torpedo room, sweeping debris into a black trash bag. I saw him pick up the fly jar and toss it in with the rest of the waste. My proof. Gone. There were cameras everywhere, dozens of them mounted on tripods and fixed to the scaffolding, all pointed at the plywood habitat. And then I saw the board. It was a large digital status display mounted on the wall, backlit in cold blue light, a project tracking system. As I was dragged closer, I realized it wasn't just 3 names. It was a list. Project Dovetail, subject status, subject 70, Martinez, completed, day 81, subject 71, Chenon, medical termination, day 44, subject 72, Okafor, voluntary extraction, day 19. The names blurred as I scrolled down, dozens of them, years of data, medical terminations, voluntary extractions, a laundry list of broken people. Then the scrolling stopped at the bottom. Subject 87, Valdez, completed. Day 78. Subject 88, Leo Cornett, expired in field. Perimeter breach. Day 62. Subject 89, Johann Svensson, terminated. Day 6. I stopped walking. The contractors pulled harder, but I dug my heels in, staring at the screen. This wasn't a research study. It was a machine, a grinder, and it had been running for years. "Move," one of the contractors said, yanking me forward. I looked past the status board toward a row of windows overlooking the warehouse floor. I saw Silas Vane. He was standing on a catwalk, holding a tablet, dictating into a recording device. He wasn't looking at me. He was looking at the mock-up, his expression calm and detached. Subject 89 exhibited escalating paranoid ideation from day 3 onward, he said into the recorder. First stage adaptation protocols ineffective. Subject bypassed security measures and accessed restricted infrastructure. On day 6, subject sabotaged primary equipment, resulting in premature termination of trial. "Vane," I shouted. "I know about Cornett. I know he was real." Vane didn't look at me. He tapped something on his tablet and continued. Subject demonstrated unexpected problem-solving capability but failed to integrate into controlled environment. Data discarded. Subject flagged for exclusion from future recruitment pools. "He died," I screamed. My voice echoed through the warehouse. "He died in the fucking desert and you covered it up." Vane paused. He glanced down at me for half a second, not at my face, at the contractors holding me. He made a small gesture with his hand, a dismissive wave. "Keep moving." The contractors pulled me toward the exit. "Recommendation," Vane said into his recorder, already turning back to his tablet. "Increase initial sedative dosage for subjects with psychological training backgrounds. Tighten perimeter monitoring protocols to prevent repeat of Subject 88 incident. Reset the stage. Schedule Subject 90 for intake next Tuesday." I tried to pull free, but the zip tie cut into my wrists. The contractors dragged me past the Tartarus one last time, and I saw them. The cleaning crew. 2 technicians in gray coveralls were already climbing the scaffolding, carrying paint cans and brushes. They were erasing me, resetting the stage, before I'd even left the building. I watched them work as the contractors pulled me through the reinforced door. The door slammed shut behind me and the sound of the warehouse disappeared. The corridor was long and narrow, concrete walls painted industrial gray, fluorescent lights overhead, no windows, no markings, just numbers stenciled beside each door. The contractors didn't speak. They just pulled me forward, past doors labeled 8, 10, 12. We stopped at room 14. One of the contractors unlocked it and shoved me inside. I stumbled and caught myself against the far wall. The zip tie came off with a quick snip, and before I could turn around, the door slammed shut. I heard the lock engage. The room was small, 8 by 10 feet. A metal cot bolted to the wall, a stainless steel toilet, a single overhead light recessed behind wire mesh. No windows. I stood in the center of the room, breathing hard, my wrists aching where the zip tie had cut into them. I could still hear Vane's voice in my head. Data discarded. Subject flagged for exclusion. I reached into my pocket for the lighter. The silver Zippo with the initials LC. My proof. The one physical thing that proved Leo Cornett had been real. My pocket was empty. They'd taken it. Security had searched me while they zip-tied my hands. They'd taken the lighter and left me with nothing. I sat down on the cot and stared at the wall. Leo Cornett was real. He'd been a subject before me, a variable in the experiment, and when he didn't perform the way Vane wanted, they erased him from the simulation and replaced him with a new actor, new variables, new data points. But Cornett had figured it out. He'd escaped. He'd run 3 miles into the desert trying to get help, and he'd died out there. I thought about the status board. 20 names, medical termination, voluntary extraction, expired in field. How many of them had figured it out? How many had run? How many had died trying to escape? I thought about Subject 90, scheduled for intake next Tuesday. Some other consultant, some other auditor, thinking they were being hired for a routine contract, thinking they were going underwater, thinking the walls were titanium and the depth was real. I lay back on the cot and closed my eyes. I'd escaped the fake box. The plywood mock-up with the painted walls and the looped engine noise. But I was still in a box, a real one this time, concrete and steel. A holding cell in a black site facility in the middle of the desert, run by a private contractor with no oversight and no accountability. And the only person who'd ever made it past the fence had died 3 miles out, alone in the sand. I opened my eyes and stared at the ceiling. The overhead light buzzed, a steady electric drone, no loops, no skips. I listened to the silence of the corridor, felt the cold concrete beneath me, smelled the dust and paint still on my clothes. Real. This was real. I almost wished it wasn't. Somewhere outside, past the fence and the desert and the 3 miles of sand, there were people asking questions about a body. Maybe that was enough. Maybe someone would keep asking. But in here, in this room, in this silence, I knew the truth. They wouldn't. The 6 o'clock news. 3 weeks later, the story made it to the evening news. I wasn't there to see it, but someone sent me a transcript. Channel 7, KPNX Arizona, the 6 o'clock broadcast with Diane Fletcher. The anchor opened with her usual polished smile, the kind that comes from years of practice. She was wearing a navy blazer, sitting in front of the green screen graphics that said Workplace Incident in bold letters. Behind her, the corporate logo for Aegis Behavioral Solutions. "Good evening, Arizona," she said. "We're following up on a story that's been making waves in the private security sector. Last Tuesday, a former consultant with Aegis Behavioral Solutions caused significant property damage at one of the company's research facilities outside Yuma. They showed B-roll footage of the facility, just an exterior shot of a nondescript warehouse complex surrounded by chain-link fencing. Desert landscape stretching out in every direction. No identifying features. Nothing that would give it away." Fletcher continued. Johan Svensson, a 41-year-old behavioral auditor from Stockholm, was arrested after what company officials are calling a mental health episode during a routine contract assignment. According to Aegis representatives, Svensson damaged nearly $5 million worth of specialized testing equipment before being subdued by on-site security personnel. They cut to a stock photo. My corporate headshot from 3 years ago, bland and professional. The caption underneath read, "Johan Svensson Consultant." Svensson was later transferred to a psychiatric facility for evaluation, Fletcher said. Aegis Behavioral Solutions released a statement this afternoon, saying they deeply regret the incident and are committed to providing mental health resources for all contractors working in high-stress environments. Then they cut to a spokesperson, mid-50s, gray suit, standing in front of a neutral backdrop with the Aegis logo centered behind him. He looked directly into the camera and spoke in a calm, measured tone. This was an isolated incident involving an individual under significant personal stress. We have protocols in place to ensure the safety of our personnel, and those protocols were followed. Mr. Svensson will receive the care he needs. The camera cut back to Fletcher in the studio. Her expression shifted slightly, a practiced look of amused sympathy. The company says no other employees were harmed in the incident, and operations at the facility have resumed as normal. Svensson is currently being held under observation and has not been formally charged. She glanced at her co-anchor off-screen and smiled. A light chuckle, the kind you give when a story is too absurd to take seriously. "Just goes to show, folks," she said. "Sometimes the pressure is all in your head." Her co-anchor laughed politely off camera. "In other news," Fletcher continued, already moving on, "the Maricopa County Board of Supervisors is considering new zoning regulations for..." But at the bottom of the screen, in the scrolling news ticker, there was another story. The kind that runs underneath the main broadcast, easy to miss if you're not paying attention. Yuma County Sheriff confirms body found 3 miles northeast of Route 95, identified as Leonard Cornett, 26, Denver, Colorado. Cause of death ruled accidental exposure, no foul play suspected. Family declines comment. That was it, 15 seconds of airtime. A sanitized corporate statement. A chuckle from the anchor. A ticker scrolling by at the bottom of the screen. Leo Cornett was dead in the desert, and I was the crazy one. I hope you enjoyed the ride on this one. It means a lot that you choose to listen to my stories. I'm going through your suggestions right now for next week, so drop a comment if you've got any good ones. Like and subscribe to join the nocturnal crew. Stay safe out there.